So now kind of, I've been in this position, believe it or not, I'm going in year 3 already. I've already been at Safe Embrace for
That's crazy. 2
years, right? I got to remember, just even talking to you when I first got my position here. Now, since we've kind of established a very good individual relationship with our community by doing group works and presentations, we have to step it up from doing a community-based change. So now what we're working on is implementing policy and procedures with bartenders, nightlife owners, adult entertainment, things like that on how to prevent domestic violence in the workplace and sexual violence and sexual harassment. Because it goes back to the saying, it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate, right? So that's great, but how do we make this functional now? How do we put this to, we have it on paper now, how do we put it in action? That's where now we get to go in and almost be kind of what I'm really excited for, especially as, someone who loves to, I think Nevada has a very energetic nightlife experience and culture that I think is really important to, keep going, especially because I think that's what makes Nevada. And being able to address an issue that's, extremely prevalent here. And unfortunately, we're the best at the worst at it. We've been in the top, 15 years for husbands murdering former wives. And, a lot of this stuff has, transpired, beginning sometimes in bars. And I think being able to prevent that will overall help our community become a better place.
So talking about how you put this into practice, what does it look like when you have these conversations with the tavern owners, if you will, of the various stripes? Because we're not judging the content of what they're doing. We're not saying that, bars need to go out of business, stop selling alcohol. We don't say that adult entertainment needs to stop. That's a simple matter of business. That's another, thing that other people can take up if they have a bellyache about it. What we're trying to do is create the best culture within those establishments as long as they're around. So what does it look like, practically speaking? How can people who listen to this maybe take something away and implement it in their own life?
Right. So what we've been doing, is, for one, how to recognize red flags, especially in a bar setting. What is domestic violence? What is sexual violence? How to look for it with your customers that come in. But I think the one where, we're getting really excited of doing is training these bartenders on how to handle disclosures, right? So, for example, it's kind of like that, almost that Cheers kind of mindset where you know your bartender by your first name and things like that, and how's it going, and, how are things going like that. And, when someone self-discloses, I've been experiencing domestic violence, I've just been sexually assaulted. How does that bartender handle that?
That's awesome, because they're not what we would call mandated reporters. And mandated reporters, just so I like to educate on this podcast, if you're mandated by law to report instances and typically it's protected populations and vulnerable populations like children or the elderly or the handicapped, if you hear about abuse, neglect, violence, or isolation, you're required by law to report those things. Now, however, adults, fully functioning adults who don't have a disability and aren't children, they don't fall under the mandated reporter law. So even in a clinical setting like here at Zephyr, if somebody tells me, hey, I'm being beat up every night at home, but you're 26 years old, I can't do anything. I'm not allowed to break your confidentiality. The law doesn't compel me to. All I can do is help motivate you to, leave the situation. So this is a really cool topic, and I didn't know you were doing this, but you're basically going to empower bartenders to notice these things and then take some kind of action. And it's not probably going to be picking up the phone and calling the cops on their spouse or whatever. But what does it look like? So
what we're hoping is, having these bartenders understand the right resources, like what resources can provide what. And then especially in the workplace, addressing workplace violence, right? Hospitality is one of the top five industries for sexual violence, right? And domestic violence, almost.
What are the others?
Business is huge.
Oh, right. The workplace. Yeah.
Workplace business is huge. And actually a really big one is education.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Teachers. And a lot of it is at the university level.
Okay.
With professors.
Fascinating.
I'm failing a class. Well, we could probably figure out a way or two to fix that grade. We've seen that a lot.
Disgusting. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Wow. So you're teaching them how to figure this out and then get them to the proper resource and have a conversation that's not weird, I'm guessing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that can kind of be a shell shock for someone that's not trained. No one, hopefully, people go into bartending, but they don't realize that, sometimes they become the therapist or the counselor, especially after someone has a couple Moscows on a Friday night, right?
Yeah.
They become the counselor or the therapist, and, sometimes these customers unload a lot, and it's tough for sometimes they're just not equipped for that. They get into that industry for that kind of line of work, and that's what they're dealt.
Not that I want to add more to your plate, but estheticians, hairstylists, manicurists also fall into that category. I just discovered that. I don't know if I just discovered it, but it was at least made more aware. Are you working with those folks too?
So we are also doing, we have a victim service program coordinator, Diana Ramirez. She's fantastic. She's actually running our Cut It Out program. So she's training hairstylists and estheticians and all of them when those self-disclosures come in, how to handle it, how to talk about it.
So they have a stack of Zephyr Wellness cards next to them?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Yes.
It's a shameless self-plug there. But seriously, if people are acknowledging this to their service industry folks, and I worked service industry for 10 years, including bartending. Actually, it's more than that if you count my DJing years. It's like almost 2 decades. But it is intimidating to hear somebody share a story about, she doesn't know that I'm out. If she knew that I was out here, man, all hell would break loose, and I gotta try to figure out a way to cover up the booze on my breath when I go home, because she's gonna know I was drinking, and it's not about the drinking. It's about how I'm just not home. And to hear that, it's like the bartender, typically like, yeah, life's tough, women, tough being married, and then you go like polish a glass or something. So your job, I guess, now is to try to help those people recognize that as a red flag and say, hey, man, I don't want to make this like super heavy, but have you talked to anybody about this? Because that doesn't sound like a healthy relationship to me. Like that's the kind of
that's the conversations we're trying to generate.
That's right? Awesome. That's super cool.
And especially when we go in and talk to hospitality, especially the hospitality industry is geared around for one, especially when it comes to sexual violence. Especially with our sexual violence policies and procedures, the bar industry is geared around women, and no one's going to go to a bar that's unsafe. Especially, for example, like sexual assault, like, I've been roofied at that bar, if,
Sure.
I've been assaulted there, right? No one's going to go to a bar that's safe. The average life of a bar is 2 years, right? So when we go in and talk about that, we're making not only your establishment safer, but you're going to
ensuring your business life.
You're going to see the long-term effects with it by making a profit and be able to sustain your business.
So there's not a lot of resistance to this when you bring it in.
No, when it comes to all this stuff, really, we've never really encountered resistance. How we word it and how we sell it. We're not saying, shame on you if you don't do this, but we weigh out the options where, hey, this is the benefits. And that's when we saw with our coaching our coaching boys and the men, and our athletes as leaders program with our female athletic teams. Every team that did it made playoffs. Every team that didn't do it didn't make playoffs.
So there's a cultural benefit to being healthy.
Yeah.
It generates success.
Yeah, exactly. And coaches that have been extremely transparent, for example, we look at Pete Savage, Reno High School. I don't think there's enough hands and toes in here to count how many state and zone championships he has over there. But he's always been the most transparent coach when it comes to our programs. NFL Academy has reached out to us about going in and working with them and training the top 100 athletes in the United States to talk about domestic violence. So the guys that care and know what it takes to be successful as a team and know what it's like to truly be a coach and that mentorship, buy in for it. And the teams that have said no, they're in it for the wrong reasons. And then for bars, the ones that have been successful bars in Midtown and other agencies in Northern Nevada are, obviously buying into it.
Well, and I appreciate that it's systemic in its nature, because as a systems therapist, I'm not into symptom treatment. I'm into problem resolution and making permanent, lasting, systemic change. And that's basically what you guys are doing. You're changing cultures. You're not going in there and saying, hey, don't beat your significant other. Ha, ha, ha. All right, we checked the box. You're saying, like, hey, how can you be a better person? How can you take willful action, affirmative steps toward change when you see it happening in other people's lives? Okay, you're not the guy who's prone to violence, but you're around people who might be. So even in the locker room of the clubhouse, and you see somebody who's like, oh man, I just want to tear the ump's head off. You're like, oh man, I don't know that that's effective. like you're creating a culture where that's just not even tolerated. And if it happens, there's not a We don't isolate the person and cast them off as an outcast or excommunicate them from the community. We actually sit them down and say, hey, what's a better way to deal with that bad call? Because we know that bleeds out into other areas. If you don't attend to underlying anger and frustration, it comes out in weird ways. Sometimes it's substance abuse, sometimes it's violence, and sometimes that violence and substance abuse are domestic in nature or they're relational, and all that contributes to greater problems that eventually land on your guys' doorstep at Safe Embrace. I love the cultural component of it. You're just changing culture. It's great.
Yeah, we've been really fortunate. I think our program's been very successful. Just doing our numbers from the past 6 months, we did over 100 presentations and did presentations to over 5,000 kids in our community. That's only in the past 6 months.
That's amazing.
So we're at least over 25,000 plus of at least people we've come in contact with.
Do you guys talk to these folks, behind the bars and the nail salons and all that? Do you talk to them about suicide too? Is that part of it?
We've talked about when we come to the training and how we're designing it now is how to look for red flags. That new line of questioning. Do you have a plan? This and that kind of things. Unfortunately, the assist training is not really mandated a lot. It's kind of more of like a volunteer thing, and that's through a really great agency here is Crisis Support Center of Northern Nevada. That assist training is I think is massive for a lot of people to attend. It's crazy how many professions don't get that suicide training and work with people who are easily could be suicidal.
Well, it's hard. It's hard to have that conversation. It's easier just to turn a blind eye to it, right? Not my problem. And that's that diffusion of responsibility. Oh, I'm just here doing your hair. Like I'm just here cutting your beard. I don't. That's not my realm. I'm not a mental health professional. But all you have to be qualified to have that conversation is be a human. If you're a human being, you can validate, you can ask certain questions, and at the end of it, if you're still really uncomfortable, we would hope that people not only wouldn't have shame, but would actually have motivation to offer a referral to a trusted provider or entity, and make sure that person that they're whose hair they're cutting or whose cocktails they're pouring comes back. We don't want to hear about some death or some violence that occurred that landed somebody in jail or in the hospital or in the cemetery when we ourselves could have done something. And I think that's a really important point to make is that even though these aren't mandatory trainings, we should want everybody to volunteer to be at least reasonably, not fluent necessarily, but we want to have a good working understanding of the language of violence and self-harm. So that we can be good bystander interventionists. Yeah,
absolutely. When we talk about bystander and upstander, that's kind of the argument I make. What's a bystander? It's a chance spectator. What's an upstander? Someone who stands up for someone's rights. All that stuff. So which looking at those definitions, especially when I work with kids, which one would you rather be? Right? Would you want to be known as a bystander or someone who's an upstander? Everyone goes up and be the upstander. Okay, well, that's great. And then we go over the bystander effect and this and that. But I think the biggest thing is knowing that common language and breaking it down that the general public can really understand.
That's awesome. Hey, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming back a second time to do this. How can people reach out? I mentioned the website, safeembrace.org, but are there different, more effective ways? Are there events coming up? This will probably post this week, so we're recording this on a Thursday. It'll probably post Monday. Domestic Violence Awareness Month is October, but we don't want to just turn off the spigot of donations just because the month ends. So what are ways that people can make sustainable contributions?
Right. So we have our website, safeembrace.org. We're on we're on social media as well, Facebook and Instagram. If you just type in Safe Embrace, we're the first ones to pop up. So please shoot us a follow or a like on our social media pages. That's where we're getting that's where we do all our updates for our awareness events. Our next awareness event is next Wednesday, so that would be, I believe, October 16th at Bighorn Bar and Tavern Grill, and then also the 23rd at 1864 we're doing DJ trivia awareness. So we're asking domestic violence questions to the public, and if you get them right, you're able to give away some soda openers and some gift cards. And the first one we just had was a big success at Beer NV, so thank you to Beer NV for hosting us. There's over 100 plus people that attended, and
that's awesome.
We're able to answer a lot of questions, and we were able to even give a few referrals. So it was overall a successful night.
That's really good. And we would be remiss because this podcast is national and international. I don't know international resources, but maybe you do. But we know there's a national domestic violence hotline. But is there a hub where people, say living in South Dakota could, donate to their local shelters or agencies?